Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. The very first episode of What a Game. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk and Kipp Adams with me on this Monday morning. And we're doing something new on this episode. We're hoping this will be the start of a series. This very first episode of What a Game, 2007 Georgia versus Florida. So if you're listening to this and you're wanting to know what is this? What is What a Game? So I've been trying to decide and really spent some time the last few weeks trying to come up with a way for us to rewatch old Georgia games. I feel like especially in the summer, there's not as much going on really other than recruiting. We kind of need that feel. And so sitting here thinking about it, for those who don't know this, 24/7 Sports is owned by CBS. So it kind of hit me, let's rewatch some games. Now, what we'll do this, if you've ever listened to the Rewatchables podcast, they rewatch movies and they kind of break them down, go through categories. Very similar setup for us. We're going to kind of give you the rundown of the lead into this game, what these two teams, when we do these games, had done prior to it. We'll break down the game itself, and then we'll look back on it 10, 15, 20 years later and discuss what it means today. We will start with Georgia, Florida. A lot of these games, as we do these, and we'll see how regularly we do these, will be CBS games because we can play clips. We'll have the rights to those. If you guys really enjoy watching these and listening to these, we may do other ones. Now, we wouldn't be able to use the clips from like an ESPN or an ABC broadcast, but we could still talk about it. The hope, we've got Ben, Kipp, and I on this episode. Hope is to have guests along the way. Perhaps former players, certainly other writers who have been or still on the Georgia beat to talk about some of these games. So before we get this rolling, Kipp, how you feeling going into this first episode? What was the rewatch for this game like for you?
Well, pure nostalgia, obviously. This is just one of the, for me, one of the best broadcasts overall, I think, from this group, and just overall, I mean, this rivalry, it's just such a meaningful game. You can't just talk Georgia football without talking about this series, and this is maybe maybe the most memorable game for, several generations. So just watching it and just knowing the stakes, even looking. Gosh, remember the SEC East, just like thinking like divisions and looking at that and going like, goodness, the win-loss records, the divisional records back when those things really, really mattered. Overall, it was just a lot more enjoyable than I thought it would be. I just got to say, like, that game, there's just a different level of stress no matter what going into that game. But obviously, as we'll talk about on the show, like for Georgia fans, it was just up like 30 notches, because a lot of times you just kind of dreaded it. And, just knowing that everyone makes that trip down and just everything that goes into this matchup, knowing now as we're covering this that it's not where the game's going to be for a couple years, kind of makes it even more, just interesting for us to talk about this rivalry, knowing that, the game's going to be in Atlanta and Tampa the next couple of years. I think it's kind of perfect for us to start with this game, because I think this is the only situation possible where people can actually miss Jacksonville. Maybe that's just me as a Brunswick native saying that. I don't know. That town has a special place for me, and being, that was kind of a rivalry city for me in Brunswick growing up. But I just think overall, this game, like I said, we're going to talk about it, but like Georgia had only won twice in 17 years going to this game. So it's just everything's kind of built up. It just felt like this was like a national title game for Georgia going. You could just see it on the sidelines.
Yeah, wanted to mention too, and Kip kind of hit on this. Highly encourage you guys when we do an episode, and we will tease it on the board a few days before we do a particular game. Go back and watch it because you'll remember a lot of stuff you forgot. Ben and I were talking about this before we got on here. This game was a lot closer than we kind of remembered it, but I'll kind of ask the same thing to you, Ben. How you feel going into this series, and especially starting with this game?
Love this idea. Little peek behind the curtain. This is, and we've as a group have now watched 2 Georgia games. This is the first one that we're now talking about it. But the exercise of going through this is just a lot of fun. This one that you chose has a special meaning for me personally, and just like my fandom of college football in general, but also probably played a pretty big role in my eventual decision to end up at Georgia as well. So this was a fun game to watch through. The other one that we'll talk about in future weeks was also really fun to watch through. So I just love this exercise, and I'm glad that we landed on this one as the first game that we're going to do, because like everything Kip said, I feel like this is a defining Georgia-Florida game for a lot of generations. And also it wasn't the like one that tipped the scales in the rivalry, but it started to get things back in the right direction for Georgia. And I think that this was sort of the beginning of what would become a pretty fun 20 years for Georgia in this rivalry.
All right, let's jump right into it. In the first category, where are you then? And Ben, you kind of teased it for you there, so let us know. This is, I believe, this Halloween, 2007. So where are you then? And if you were at the game, shout that out too.
Yeah, I was at the game. I believe I've told this story on a Junkyard Dawgcast before, but my best friend in the world, my best man in my wedding, Chris Stevens, I'll give him a shout out here, grew up a huge Florida fan. His grandpa played at Florida. His parents both went to Florida. He grew up a huge Florida fan. He ended up going to Florida and is now a season ticket holder for Florida. And so I've sort of grown up around that. And I started going to Georgia Florida games in probably 2003 to 2005 range. And I didn't have much of a rooting interest, to be honest with you. I had Georgia friends. I had Florida friends. My dad's from the West Coast. My mom's from the Midwest. So college football was sort of a new thing for me. And Georgia, Florida was really my introduction into college football. And I'd gone maybe once or twice prior to the 2007 game, but I will never forget being at this game in 2007. I was in the end zone, probably about 20 to 25 rows up in the end zone where Noshawn Moreno scores that first touchdown and all hell breaks loose. And I know we'll talk about that moment plenty, but I'll never forget sitting next to Chris in the stands and him just looking at me and saying, "Mark Richt has no class," which is hilarious in retrospect, knowing what we know about Mark Richt and then who the Florida head coach was at the time. Just, it's a moment that I'll never forget. And like, there's so many moments. It's an inside joke between Chris and I at this point, where whenever something's just not going the way that we want to, we just say such and such has no class. And obviously it's a joke at this point. But yeah, I will never forget being in that end zone for that moment. And like I said, I didn't have a rooting interest really. And I know that we've now reached a point in our professional careers where we're not supposed to have rooting interests either. But like that moment, I think made a decision for me in part where I said, man, this was awesome. This was cool. Like I always was a kid that thought I wanted to go out of state for college. And I think that was a moment where I said, you know what, maybe I need to give Georgia a little bit more of a look here. So I give Mark Richt's decision, or the player's decision, or whoever is responsible for what ended up happening in that end zone, I give them a lot of credit for the fact that we're all sitting here today talking on this, because I don't know that I would end up at Georgia. And if I don't end up at Georgia, I don't know that we're doing all this the way that we're doing right now. So yeah, credit to Mark Richt and that decision to storm the field there after that opening touchdown, because I think it changed history for a lot of people, but myself included.
Some would say credit, some would say blame.
Yeah.
Where am I in October 2007? I'm an eighth grader. I did want to shout out too. Ben talked about his friend that was a Florida fan. I grew up, one of my best friends, shout out Connor Mullins, diehard Florida fan. Pretty sure I was at his grandmother's house when Florida lost to Mississippi State, and then they fired Ron Zook a couple days after that. But I'm in middle school. Look, I was a pretty pudgy middle schooler. Didn't have a lot going on for me. Got glasses the year before. That things weren't looking great. But you know what? I had a reputation. You know what my reputation was? I was the biggest Georgia fan at my middle school. People just always. I was kind of the sports guy. I had pretty much always been what I am now as far as interest in sports. So, Georgia football was a big deal to me. This rivalry was a big deal to me because Georgia, just as much success as they had, I really started watching. I guess that would have been '01. So I pretty much was following it since Mark Richt had been the coach. They just could not beat Florida. So this was kind of a game I always went into as a fan going, well, maybe they'll go 11-1, or I guess, 10-1. I think early on they might have only played 11 games those first few years I was watching, but they're not going to beat Florida. It was just kind of assumed. I still have back at my parents' house from the AJC in '04 when they beat Florida, the headline is just one word, and it was finally. Like, they just could not beat Florida. You just kind of assumed that it wasn't going to happen. And, we'll talk about season at a glimpse. This is Florida coming off of its first national championship with Urban Meyer. So I'm sure going back to middle school Jordan, there was not a lot of confidence going into this game in Jacksonville. All right, Kipp, tell us about where you were when Georgia and Florida faced off in 2007.
I was dead tired. I'm going to tell you right now. My younger son, Jude, had been born 2 weeks before this. So at the time, I was running a restaurant and filming games on the side, filming, high school football games. Because back then, we didn't have huddle, guys. We had this thing called film, where you had to actually go out with a camera. And that, I think at the time, if you had a little bit of extra money, you can get one of these things called an SD card to put in the camera. And that helped a lot. But still, no, it was just straight up film most of the time. And I thought my first week back would be there was this big time matchup that I had penciled in. Jude came in, and I was like, oh, gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to film this game. It was going to be Riverdale Griffin. And you know what? Riverdale's offensive tackle, Cordy Glenn, did me a solid. He got suspended for fighting a week before. So I did not go out that week. I got kind of a pass. He would be playing Toby Jackson, big-time defensive tackle for Griffin back in the day. So, yeah, I got a week off from filming, but then I was like, all right, I'll make up for it. I'll double up. So Friday, the night before the game, I'm filming A.J. Green in Somerville. Actually, I think they're on the road. I think they're playing Fort Dorchester, and he goes for just a typical A.J. Green, 3 touchdowns, 185 yards. He took a punt return back for a touchdown. And, I'm going to grab him after the game, and it's 2 hours after the game. There's still a line going up the field into the stands of opposing fans, opposing players, in line for autographs or get their picture taken with AJ. He's just standing there, like he's got a security guy with him, but he's just standing there and just doing every single one of them. It's like 11:50, like they stop, and then AJ graciously does interview with me after all of that, and I wait to do that. So I'm on the road coming back after that. It's after midnight. I do not recommend that drive to anyone at all. Don't make that drive. After midnight, it is not fun, but yeah, Saturday morning, I go and I film Cedar Grove play at Hallford Stadium because back then you can get a couple games on Saturday. So I filmed Xavier Avery and Joshua Jarbo, who it might be on YouTube, but that's like an OG hat game commitment for Joshua Jarbo, where he had the 3 hats on there. That Georgia one got flipped quickly, and I think he had the Oklahoma hat inside of the Florida hat. But that's one of the original ones, Under Armour game. So basically I get out of that game and I'm at a taco back watching the game, and I'm just like, I'm there with friends, and I'm like, they're asking me questions, and I'm just like, yeah, I can barely mumble words, but, yeah, that game, I just assumed, like, it's just a given that this game is going to be, not great for Georgia. But as we talk about, like, we say weird things happen in Jacksonville for a reason. And I think, like, this was definitely one of those. But me, I was not. Yeah, I was just taking in the caffeine and loading up for the game. But I love how different our experiences were and where we were, like the different stages of life that we were for that, because I think it's great for perspective, because this game is just like everyone can say, like, I mean, you remember where you were very specifically. For me, it was like, I was just running on fumes, but that game, I mean, it was an unforgettable first time watch, like just seeing that happen in real time. Definitely, made it a lot easier for that week and to go home and hug the kids.
All right, number 20 Georgia versus number 9 Florida. Season at a glimpse. Both teams entered the matchup 5-2 overall, 3-2 in the conference. This entire SEC East, and we'll talk about it with the stakes, it was just totally on top of each other. Not really any separation, especially going into this game. Georgia had dropped its second game of the season to South Carolina 16-12. Won the next 3 games, then lost at Tennessee 35-14. Florida, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, defending national champs, had dropped consecutive games against Auburn and LSU. They had beaten Kentucky the week before, but I had honestly forgotten about this. Tim Tebow got hurt in that game, and that is a big storyline going into this game. I believe it was his non-throwing shoulder was giving him issues. They beat Kentucky 45-37, but there were real questions about what Tim would be able to do, how good he would be, how much of the pain tolerance he could deal with. And as you rewatch this game, it's very obvious that he was dealing with some pain. The stakes of this game: 5 teams in the East had 2 defeats in conference entering this game. You had Georgia, you had Florida, you had Tennessee, you had South Carolina, and you had Kentucky, all just right on top of each other, no separation. I really think, not knowing what the schedule was ahead for these teams, that it was a situation where, whoever won this game was probably seen as the favorite to win the SEC East and go on and play in Atlanta. But Kipp, I want to set you up here. You mentioned this at the top. Going into this game, Georgia had lost 15 of 17 to Florida. Just remind the folks what the energy was like around this rivalry, because it is a 180 compared to what we've seen even in the last 10 years.
Yeah, you mentioned, the other game that Georgia had won. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you remember when Georgia wins. I mean, for me, it's just that 97 game, when Bobo's the quarterback. Like, that's it. Those are the 2 games. Like, just every other game's a Florida win. So this was similar to where Georgia is now with a lot of its rivalries, where it's just kind of like, like South Carolina, or, I mean, even like Georgia Tech, Tennessee, Auburn. Like, I mean, thinking about where the program is now with those rivalry games, that's where Florida was with this rivalry game. They owned it. And it was just, they had the bragging rights. If you got a win, it was like, yeah, it was a fluke. Like, we fire our coach for things like that. You don't lose to Georgia. And that's kind of where things were. And this was when, Mark Richt had a chance to bring in his own players. I mean, even like his SEC title teams, Florida still, had their way. Like those teams, like you don't have, other coaches' players. Now he's brought in his own players, but you haven't gotten over the hump of winning this game yet. So I just think that was kind of that still like, is Mark Richt going to be that guy? This game is kind of like a tipping point, I think, for Mark Richt and his time at Georgia, to where you're in between stages. You got your own guys in, and you're not necessarily at the everyone's calling you underachieving stage yet. And I'm going to bring that up later, because it's coming soon. You're kind of right before that, but you're also just like, where is this program going to go under Mark Richt? Like, what are they actually going to be capable of? And them already having a couple of losses, it was just kind of like, well, I mean, this is just another one of those seasons, of many of those seasons. But in this rivalry game, it's just kind of like, man, are they ever going to get there? Like, for the last 20 years, it's been as one-sided as it can be. And I just think that that's why, for me, like, this game is kind of where I think everything changed for this rivalry.
Yeah, I mean, even mentioning, looking back at that rivalry, I think about 2002, Georgia may win a national title or at least play for one if it doesn't lose to, if I'm remembering right, not a great Florida team that year. So it was a game that just kind of hung over Georgia and gave them issues year after year. All right, Ben, you mentioned that you were at this game, but how much knowledge did you have about this rivalry? What we're just talking about, the fact that it was so one-sided going into this.
Yeah, I mean, that was my perception of it. I mean, I'm giving Chris far too many shout outs on this, but like, we'd get off the school bus after Georgia Florida games and he'd see all his UGA friends and he'd be doing the 2-15 conversation. Like, and it's like, I know we're talking about the 2007 season specifically. So it was, 15 of the last 17, but it was like, that was a conversation that happened for years. It was like 11-13, 12-4, like it just kept growing. And so it was just a running joke at that point that like every year Florida was going to win and you were just going to add numbers to each part of the statistics. And that was kind of that. So like, that was really my understanding of the rivalry. And then I did get to go be around, Tailgater Alley, RV City, like some of the experiences around Jacksonville, when I was 12, 13, 14. This game, I was probably 16 years old. So I'd been, I think, twice prior to this game. So I had a good understanding of the rivalry and just the fanfare that went along with it. But it really wasn't until this game, I wouldn't say, that things started to really click for me and just my awareness of everything as it related to both universities and the rivalry as a whole.
Reminded me, too, when you were talking there, Ben, I mentioned that 04 game when Georgia beats them. I want to shout out a Florida fan I grew up with, Jenny Bierman. She knew I was a big Georgia fan. I'll never forget coming back to school that Monday after Georgia had beaten them in 04 and like just kind of walking up to her and her, like, she just preemptively like called for the teacher, like, get him away from me. I already know what he's going to do. He's going to be talking about that score on Saturday. All right, next category, the stars. I want to talk about the players going into this game that were big deals that you assumed were going to play a big role for each of their teams. We'll start with Georgia. Matthew Stafford, the prized quarterback that the Bulldogs had gotten. I believe the 2006 season was his first at Georgia. Noshawn Moreno kind of had stepped up with Thomas Brown and Craig Lumpkin getting hurt that year. He's a redshirt freshman in this game. Muhammad Massaquoi at wide receiver. He makes a big play that we'll talk about later on. Dannell Ellerby on defense. Very productive over the course of this 07 season. Flipping it over to Florida. Tim Tebow, I mean, this was his first full year as a starter. He came in behind Chris Leak and played in certain packages, and Florida won that national title. Percy Harvin, who, my goodness, in this game is he just impressive. Andre Caldwell, another receiver. Linebacker Brandon Spikes, defensive lineman Derek Harvey, all very productive. But I want to flip it back to the Georgia side, and this is something I'd kind of forgotten. And Kipp and I were texting about this as we were watching this game. It is abundantly clear how much Matthew Stafford's like, I have the arm, nothing else matters. Let's just trust this thing. Kipp, I mean, just absolute gunslinger, and you see it in a specific play we'll talk about later. But, man, I don't know that I've ever seen a quarterback with as much confidence in himself as Matthew Stafford did.
He was the truest version of, F it, they're down there somewhere. Like, he was not worried about coverages or anything. And, I mean, the version that you see now, the version that you've seen the last 15 decades, like, that was the version he saw in himself then. Like, he's like, I got the arm angle. It's just whatever. Like, I'll just worry about the results later. And it is fascinating, the version of Matthew Stafford that Georgia got. Like, it was a work in progress, but just a quarterback that, you had to let him know, like, you don't have to make every throw. But he was like, no, I have to make every throw. Like that's the version you see in this game is where he's just like, I'm hitting that button. Like you see the Brett Favre, like you could tell, like he's been watching some Brett. Like he's just like, I'm gonna let this thing go, and it's gonna get there, man. And even on some, you just saw some that were like off the mark, but it was just like you could tell that would have broken a finger or two if it would have been on the mark. Like he just threw some layers in there, and it's, I mean, that is also something as a coaching staff that, I mean, people talk about like having to coach guys up. I don't want to necessarily say this is where you have to coach a guy down, but you got to really like reeling a guy in who already is like, Mel Kiper already said he's going number one overall in the draft. Like he had already said that. That was a famous early message board discussion was in high school. He's already said he's number one. Tell me where that's happened since, like where someone is in high school and they've already made that. I mean, we are dealing with one of the most hyped names in college football this last couple of years now in Arch Manning, but I mean, it was not the same. Like Stafford wasn't even like, he wasn't even the number one overall prospect that year, but still he had that coming into Athens. He was known as that guy. Has it really, I mean, like as far as quarterback prospects, like as arm talent, I mean, he's on every short list of guys since then. And I think for a coaching staff, like that brings in its own set of, I don't want to say problems, but it's something where you're like, we got to work with him. But I mean, like he already thinks he's, made it in a sense because of that arm talent. And that's a unique set of like coaching scenario there where you're like, man, we gotta go in kind of, do we go in and like just give them hard coaching, or do we don't want, I mean, there's no transfer portal back then, but just imagine that. Like imagine Matthew Stafford now coming in first year. You got to give him the keys to the program, right? Or else he's leaving. But that's kind of really how Georgia had to handle it. You had to just let him go and take some of those throws that you'll see in this game and just work with it. And Georgia did that for 3 years, really, I think. That's overall, like looking back, they just kind of let him go for it, for better or for worse. So that was the Matthew Stafford experience where you're going to have 4 or 5, oh my gosh, throws, and then a couple, oh my God, facepalm throws. That's just the way it is. And fans experience looking back, and everyone thought, like looking at Matthew Stafford winning the NFL MVP and being kind of the, one of the best quarterbacks of all time. It's interesting. Like, what was the Georgia experience like having Matthew Stafford as your quarterback? I think you'll get 10 different answers from 10 different people.
I think, too, from what I can tell, the fan base kind of has a weird feeling looking back on him, because I think he's made comments about, like, he doesn't like when people say "go Dogs" to him and stuff like that. So it's sort of a weird deal there. Ben, I wanted your perspective over on the Florida side. I had honestly forgotten that this was the year Tim Tebow wins the Heisman. He has a great season. But I swear to God, I forgot how ugly his throwing motion was. Watching this back, I was like, "Oh, how was this guy as good?" And I mean, very well deserved all his college accolades. But my goodness, that was ugly.
Well, yeah, and if you just threw on this game, you'd be sitting there thinking, "How in the world did this guy win the Heisman?" I know he still had moments, but like, I'm not trying to pile on the guy, but and I have it in my notes here. I don't know exactly where it was, but there was a throw that he made during the game where there are 2 Florida players just running wide open. I think he's throwing it to Cornelius Ingram, but I'm really not entirely sure who he's throwing it to on that play. But I think George is up maybe 28-24 in that moment, and he just completely misses Cornelius Ingram for what would have been a walk-in touchdown. And I think the look of this game, we might not be even having this conversation about this game if he hits that throw. There were some moments in that game that make you realize, like, oh, that's why he never worked out really beyond the college game. But He still looked good. I will say, any Georgia fan that does go back and rewatch this game because you're listening to this, just brace yourself, because you are going to get annoyed by how many times Vern and Gary bring up the right shoulder that Tim Tebow is dealing with. Like, you would think that the dude is incapable of playing football on that day because of how many times that they mention his shoulder. And I'm not disputing that he was dealing with a little bit of a shoulder issue during that game and that they weren't running him as much as they ordinarily would have run him. But on their 2 big touchdown drives that they had when they had to have it, they were still running Tim Tebow a ton on those possessions. When they got into the red zone, they're still using Tim Tebow in the run game. And I think they scored 2 of their touchdowns with Tim Tebow's legs in that game, in like inside the 5-yard line. And so, brace yourself for that if you're listening to it. But it was that throw to Cornelius Ingram where he just completely whiffs on him, where I was like, all right, that's the Tim Tebow that we grew to know and love. But obviously that season, and really, the 4 years that he was at Florida, he was exceptional.
Yeah, there's one point where Vern and Gary really break down how he gets up from the ground, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, look, oh, he's not using that shoulder," and it's like, "All right, relax, guys." Well, I'm glad you mentioned Vern and Gary. The next category is the booth. Now, we're not going to do this every episode, especially when it's Vern and Gary. We've kind of covered this, but we will jump around through the years, so there may be other situations where the booth is different. Play-by-play, Vern Lundquist, you know him, you love him. By this point in 2007, he's a veteran. This is his 10th year back at CBS. He had a previous stint there. He got in his big break as a sports anchor in Austin, Texas. He covered the Dallas Cowboys for a while. Then he had national stints with ABC, CBS, and TNT. Gary Danielson, the analyst, former Purdue quarterback, spent 13 years in the NFL before becoming a broadcaster. He'd been at ESPN for 7 years. Then he went to ABC Sports for 9. And then he teams up with Vern Lundquist at CBS in 2006. Sideline reporter, in my humble opinion, the GOAT, Tracy Wolfson. She's in her 4th year as a CBS sideline reporter. Began her career in Trenton, New Jersey. Worked at Long Island News Tonight as well as MSG Network. Then she winds up joining CBS. And look, these guys, Vern and Gary, they're not perfect. A lot of this is kind of Vern. He calls Asher Allen Asher after a fumble recovery early on. He calls Jennifer Hudson Jennifer Holiday when he's telling a story about Jason Johnson. Hey, shout out Dave McMahon. The legend gets the shout out from Vern on that one. Late in the game, he calls Rennie Curran Renee Curran. But Ben, I mean, love him or hate him, it's Vern and Gary and everybody else playing for second. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. And I don't know how much we want to get into some of these things now, because I know we were going to talk about some of our favorite calls, but like one of my all-time favorite moments from watching this broadcast, and I don't even know if I'd ever watched this broadcast before just because I'd been at the game. So I'm not 100% sure if I'd ever seen some of these things. But at the beginning of the game, before it starts, Gary pulls out these like cardstock, like pieces of paper with numbers written on them, doing this, what he feels is some elaborate breakdown of historical stats and how many points Georgia has had in their wins versus how many points they were scoring in their losses. And the funniest part to me, I'm not even going to be able to do this justice talking about it because it is hilarious. He's just handing these pieces of paper over to Vern, and like, it's just not what you see from broadcast nowadays. They end up pulling the paper back out in like the 3rd quarter of the game as if it's some, reference to this genius that they had from before the game. The funniest part to me about the whole thing is his thesis basically at the end of all of these stats is Georgia needs to score at least 28 points to win this game. And 28 points just wouldn't have been enough points to win that game. I mean, they needed more than 28 points to be able to win that game. And so he went through all of that only for it to be a stat that wouldn't have been good enough for Georgia to get the win. But I loved it. Old school Gary and Vern was fantastic to watch.
Yeah, what Gary was doing there was giving a lot of love, actually. And I don't know, maybe he had seen that and felt inspired getting ready for the holiday season. All right, we're not going to go blow by blow for this entire game. Again, we want you guys to go back and watch it if you haven't. But I'm going to roll through the game recap, some of the big plays, and also all of the scoring plays. Marcus Howard kind of sets the tone for Georgia early in this one, sack on the first drive, and you got a lot of pressure from Georgia as this game went on. This game was a lot tighter, as I mentioned earlier, than I realized. But Georgia winds up pulling away in the fourth quarter. Florida's running back situation absolutely dire in this game, and the defensive line for Florida is decimated, and Georgia takes advantage as this game goes on. Talked about that pressure. Georgia had 6 sacks in this game. Florida had just allowed 5 in the previous 7 games, so that very much affected, as we mentioned, a Tim Tebow who was not 100%. All right, Kipp, we got to talk about this. Georgia has a 14-7 lead early in the second quarter. I had mentioned Asher Allen had forced this fumble. That's when Noshawn Marino scores, and we'll get into that play later. But then Matthew Stafford has what I think is the ugliest pick six I've seen in my entire life. He's in his own end zone. They run play action. Mike Bobo, what are we doing? And just absolute easy pick six. And it winds up tying the game, getting things going. Florida makes things interesting in the third quarter, and I believe might have really pushed and seemed like they had momentum. But Georgia, Noshawn Marino kind of break the will of Florida as that game goes on in the fourth quarter. Running through the scoring summary real quick, Noshawn Marino 1-yard touchdown with 6 minutes left in the first quarter. That gives Georgia a 7-0 lead. That is the celebration touchdown. That is the play everybody remembers, and we are going to break that down. Florida responds. Tim Tebow, 40-yard touchdown pass to Lewis Murphy with 4:39 to go in the first. And then Georgia comes right back. Matthew Stafford, 84-yard touchdown pass to Muhammad Massaquoi with 3:40 left in that opening quarter. Mention that pick. Wandy Pierre-Louis, 25-yard pick six. The game is tied with 14:41 to go in the second quarter. Florida kicks a field goal about halfway through the second quarter to take a 17-14 lead. Noshawn Marino scores late in that second quarter on a 10-yard run. Georgia goes into the half up 21-17. Third quarter, Matthew Stafford hits Brandon Sutherland for a 1-yard touchdown pass that makes it a 28-17 game with 12:02 left in the third quarter. Tim Tebow, as Ben mentioned, gets in to the end zone on a 2-yard run, cuts the Georgia lead to 28-24 with 7:22 to go. Fourth quarter, one of the plays of the game, kind of gets Georgia in a position where it can maintain and keep Florida at bay. Matthew Stafford hits Mikey Henderson for a 53-yard touchdown pass. I believe this was shortly after they had forced a turnover on downs. Georgia up 35-24 with 11:03 to go. Florida does score again, a 3-yard touchdown run, 35-30. They try to go for 2. They don't get the 2-point conversion. And Georgia finishes it off. Noshawn Marino, 3-yard touchdown run, 42-30, 3:54 to go in the game. Favorite of these categories, how it's 2007, just for an explanation. When you watch this game back, as you're seeing and hearing what's going on, you're going to see things that make you go, this was really 19 years ago. And some of these are going to be redundant, so I don't think we're going to be like, oh man, it's so hard, this isn't HD. Like, yeah, obviously. They're using fullbacks. There's one fullback thing I want to shout out, but okay, the game has changed. We'll shout out Penn Wagers. Been a minute since I've seen him in a game. I'm going to throw out a few and then save my favorite one and then turn it over to you guys. Some wildcat in this game that really did show you, hey, this is the prime. Let's put the running back behind center and hike the ball to him. Didn't go well for Florida. I think they lose a fumble on that play. There is I believe it's coming back from a commercial. They're showing UGA 6, and they've got Who Let the Dogs Out playing to it. I'm like, all right, a little Baja boys. I like it. Baja men, excuse me. And then my other one I'll shout out, Brandon Sutherland catches a touchdown, and I just thought about fullbacks, whatever. That was his 5th receiving touchdown of his career. I don't know that I've ever heard of a fullback catching multiple touchdowns. 5 in a career. I was pretty impressed by that. Ben, how did you know it was 2007? What were some of the things that caught your attention?
Well, there were a few. Do you want me to just kind of rip through some of the things that stood out to me? Okay, so the opening montage, which I noticed this in the other one we did, but the opening montage, just some of the players that are being shown in the opening the SEC montage. Obviously, Tebow and Stafford, who are playing in this game, but Darren McFadden, Brandon Cox was on there. It does all the SEC logos ripping through, and obviously no A&M, no Missouri, no Texas, no Oklahoma. So just a shorter sort of banner image there. it was the 75-year logo. It was the 75 years, so they had the 75-year broadcast. The midfield had the 75 years of the SEC at midfield. I didn't even remember this being the case, but the stadium being called Jacksonville Municipal Stadium, I do not remember the advertisement list stadium, which was definitely a notable one. I can't remember if you just said this or not, but like right when the broadcast is starting, Vern like gets in full Vern voice, and they show a graphic on the screen that says HD TV by Sony. And Vern says, brought to you in high definition. And just Vern saying that while we're watching like the most pixelated football game I've watched in the last 20 years was hilarious. South Florida, number 11 on the bottom line. I feel like when you think of the 2007 season, you think of like that was the crazy year. Everything went haywire. And like South Florida is just randomly in the mix that season. So it was fun watching the bottom line a little bit too, seeing some things that were happening there. Willie Martinez, Georgia's offensive coordinator. That was a big, like, oh man, you know, that's an old one. You mentioned August 6, the dog bones on the helmet, which I know is not like, there's going to be a lot of these rewatches where there's going to be dog bones on the helmet, but that it was nice to see. I enjoy it. They did the mid-game pan to Dan Mullen in the box, and they're like, Dan Mullen, 35-year-old offensive coordinator, talking about him like, you know, this guru. I really like that. And then I got to call, these are my last ones, but I got to call out the mid-game segments, I guess you could say. Like they had the student athlete recognition, which I remember when they used to do here's their GPA, here's their major, like here's what they did. But I loved the advertisements. I know that's no free ads, but the advertisements that they had with some of these segments, it being the Red Lobster student athlete of the game for each side. The Wrangler denim play of the game was great. And then the Ruby Tuesday player of the game. That one got me good right at the end, hearing Vern get all excited about the Ruby Tuesday player of the game. That was one where I was like, all right, we're not seeing too many Ruby Tuesday sponsored advertisements mid-football game these days.
I want to make sure and correct the record. Willie Martinez was defensive coordinator.
Defensive coordinator, my apologies. Yeah, Mike Bobo, of course, was the offensive coordinator.
Kipp, what'd you have for the most 2007 thing you saw?
Well, you guys went through most of mine, but I mean the opening CBS on SEC intro is just iconic. I think for me, and we mentioned it before, like Gary asking Vern to hold up the cue cards is a very like, we don't have the budget to give them digital at this point a moment. I think midway through the second quarter, they mentioned Jacksonville landing with 7 minutes left in the second quarter, and obviously, I mean, it's not there anymore. So that's a moment where you know you're watching a broadcast. It's basically 20 years old now. There are a couple for me that stood out. I think there's a questionable illegal procedure call that just wiped out this explosive on Sean Bailey, who ran a great route. And they pan to the sideline, and you see this young student assistant talking to Matthew Stafford on the sideline. It's Todd Hartley. He's just got the headset on. He's trying to, you know, calm Stafford down. I think that was his second, maybe third year on the staff as a student assistant. I think he goes to Marshall the next year. But yeah, you just see like, you know, young Todd Hartley out there, and then late in the fourth, they're talking about no lead is safe. And Vern mentions Matt Ryan and Boston College scored 14 points in the final 2 minutes to beat Virginia Tech on Thursday night. That is the truest moment where I'm like, okay, this is definitely 2007. My goodness, that's just like the ultimate callback right there for me.
All right, I'm going to play for everyone what I thought was the most 2007 thing about this game. This is something that Vern mentions pretty late in the going.
Gotta hold serve. Georgia's been holding serve because you know when Florida gets a serve back, and they got the serve back right now, Rutledge is going to make a block, Harvin's going to catch a pass, and sometimes even run over the official at the end of a play.
Boom! Goes the dynamite.
I totally missed that. That's so good.
I heard it, and I was like, "What did Vern just drop a boom goes the dynamite?" And this, I looked it up. This was 2 years after that video had gone viral. For me, guys, that was the most 2007 thing about this. He quoted "Boom goes the dynamite."
Jordan, I mean this in by far the most derogatory way I could possibly say it. I can picture you saying that to me in the press box when something happens during a Georgia game today. So you and Vern, I don't know if you feel good about this, but you and Vern more alike than you might care to admit.
I would absolutely take that as a compliment. All right, next category, that guy. Now, if you listen to the movie podcast where they go back and rewatch, it's usually character actors. It's usually guys that pop up in a movie like, hey, that guy. So for us in this, it's a guy. It's not a star. We're not talking about, hey, there's no Sean Moreno. Like, no, I mean that's kind of handling it. But that guy, it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. I'm going to start with you guys. You guys throw the names out that stood out to you. I did a little bit of research to try to find where these dogs are now. So I'll start with you, Ben. Who were a couple of that guys for you when you were rewatching this game?
Well, a couple of them are guys that we mentioned already. Asher Allen was one for me. Like he was, and I know he was more of a like central figure of those teams than maybe like that guy, so to speak. But for me, it had been a while since I'd heard Asher Allen's name, or Alan Asher, if you're talking about Vern, the first time he gets mentioned during the game. But he just was one of those players where when I think back to like when I'm in high school, like who are the guys that I just gravitated toward, like he was definitely one of those guys, made some plays in this game specifically that had a big impact on it as well. So Asher Allen was one that came to mind for me. And then Trenton Sturdivant was like, I remember back then thinking Trenton Sturdivant was like the biggest, greatest offensive tackle that Georgia would ever have. And obviously he was a very good player, but now we've seen some bona fide, big time, first round type of tackles come through Georgia. So maybe it looks a little bit different when you look back in the lore of Georgia offensive tackles. But even when I saw him in this game, whether it was on the field, whether it's a couple cutaway shots to him on the sideline, I'm just like, this is a massive, massive human being. And like when I think of Georgia offensive tackles, like, you know, part of it is just where I was at age wise when this was happening. But like he's kind of one of the first tackles that I think of when I think of Georgia football.
All right, Kipp, who was that guy when you were rewatching?
Well, first play of the game, I noticed two guys. One, kind of like with Ben, it's like he probably shouldn't be that guy, but it's just the fact that he's still very like part of, I guess, football, still has an active role, is Marcus Howard. Just the fact that immediately he set the tone for that game. Boom, Tebow's down. Like we talked about earlier, like they knew Tebow was banged up and he had to stay in the pocket and took advantage. But this is the fact that, again, he comes off the edge in that game. I mean, he's not your like stereotypical DN. They're not playing like a pure three-man front then. He's playing defensive end at my size, 6'2", 230. You know, I'm not 230 now, but I've been 230, and I would not be playing defensive end for any program. But he comes off the edge and takes on Tebow, and he's still training guys. Like we're seeing Georgia players, Falcons players training with Marcus Howard now, still very active in that role. So that was just kind of a like, there he is then, there he is now, and I mean, even to Ben's point with Sturdivant, like. He's right. Like that was the like OG can't miss left tackle with Sturdivant. Like he was like exactly how you want your left tackle to be built. He came in, and when he was on the field, he played like one. He just could not stay healthy. So just seeing on the game was a reminder. Like that was like I just think. Like for Georgia, like of the what could have been, he was definitely one of those guys. Because now Georgia's having off left tackles just go in the first round every year. Like he should have been one of those guys. But right at the beginning, like they're announcing the starting lineups, and they get it wrong because they mention they're showing all the linebackers, and they're right. Going into the game, Brandon Miller was the starting weak side linebacker, but it was definitely Rennie Curran on the field at the beginning. There is no confusing Brandon Miller for Rennie Curry. Brandon Miller was the old school. You're firing up NCAA football 2007, 2008. Create a player. You're going to get Brandon Miller. You're going to create him first. Back then, as you're manually going in and entering all the Georgia players, you're just jacking everything up for him. But Brandon Miller had gotten smoked on this end-around touchdown pass against Tennessee before, and they had inserted Rennie to get more speed on the field. They basically went nickel with Rennie Curran at that point because they're like, I'm sorry, Brandon, but you can't handle these guys when we do need guys to drop back. So Rennie was on the field, and for me, Rennie's just a special player because he was my very first recruit interview. He was playing in the Corky Kell Classic a year before, and I'm never going to forget, like, he has like 18 tackles in this game. And after the game, this like 5 foot, whatever, 9-0 tackling magnet walks up after just destroying people. I mean, it's just, Rennie Curran walks up. It's just like what I just saw doesn't match. And then he starts talking. Like, he thanks me for doing the interview, and he's got the softest voice imaginable. Like, he's got the braces on and everything. And I'm like, I just spent 2 hours watching you just punish ball carriers. This is not matching up with the on-field experience. So just seeing him out there in that game, and, I mean, he had an impact in the game. Talk about it later. One of the biggest plays in the game, to be honest. But for me, that was definitely that guy, because that's my first recruit interview, and from Brookwood, and just a guy that, I mean, I know a lot of Georgia fans. I mean, like, he was just one of those original kind of like favorite guys. This series probably helped him a lot in that regard. Just racked up tackles left and right, and that was back when Georgia would always have a linebacker like with like 80, 100 tackles. Like, you were going to have one of your linebackers lead the team in tackles no matter what. And he was definitely like in that line of guys who are just like, just mark him down, 12 tackles. He didn't have that in this game. But again, he's a freshman, and he's part of that first class of guys that I covered in recruiting. So it's just kind of a different experience getting into this job and seeing guys that you covered from the high school stage get to play in the biggest stage possible.
I'm going to start with my guys and give you the background on the guys that Ben and Kipp both mentioned. So the first guy I had was tight end Trip Chandler. Just seeing that name, I was like, man, I have not thought about Trip Chandler in a while. He works in Atlanta now and is a partner at HKA in the Construction Claims and Expert Services team. HKA works in risk mitigation and helps clients, quote, manage risk, disputes, and uncertainty on complex contracts and challenging projects. Trenton Sturdivant really has no online presence that I could find. You guys mentioned that he dealt with 3 ACL tears. He came back and worked for the Athletic Association shortly after graduating, but really can't find him online besides that. Rennie Curran played 6 years in the NFL, also in Canada. Now a keynote speaker who is, quote, helping high performers become high-performing leaders in companies, teams, and life. Shout out another speaker as well. This was we mentioned Asher Allen. He does some speaking now. He played in the NFL for 3 years, also a consultant at Nutriden, which provides, quote, a personalized approach to functional nutrition to our family of practitioners and their patients through quality supplements and one-on-one support. Elsewhere, Marcus Howard played in the NFL for 2 years, played in the CFL for 7 years, 2011 All-Star and 2015 Grey Cup champion. And as Kipp mentioned, he is now a trainer at MWH Sports Training, does a lot of work with up-and-coming pass rushers to get them ready. My last pick was Prince Miller, cornerback, played in the NFL and in Canada for 4 years and became a logistics account executive for Total Quality Logistics just this past March. Total Quality Logistics, quote, connects customers with shipping needs with carriers that have the available capacity and service offerings. Did want to mention this too. I don't know if y'all had this experience watching this. Had a couple of jump scares on the Florida side. There's one point they call a timeout early on, and I look, And Aaron Hernandez is right there in the huddle. And I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. And then very late in this game, Florida's trying to make a comeback, and it cuts to the sideline. And who's there on a headset listening in? But Cam Newton. So I don't know if did either of you guys clock either of those guys?
I did. I clocked the Aaron Hernandez one. I didn't know whether we were going to talk about Aaron Hernandez on this.
This is a Georgia podcast. Absolutely, we're going to talk about Aaron.
No, of course. But yeah, I saw that one. There was similar to that. I think it was after. I want to find out. I'm trying to remember exactly when the moment was. I think it was after Massaquoi had his 84-yard touchdown. He gets the penalty, which there were so many penalties in this game, especially I think 3 of the first 4 touchdowns had unsportsmanlike extra personal fouls after him. But Massaquoi goes to the sideline. First person that puts his arm around Massaquoi, then offensive line coach Stacy Searles was the one that was right there to let him know, hey, don't worry about it. It's all good.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, come back, talk about the biggest moments, the best calls, and talk about who was the MVP of this one. Let's run through some of the biggest moments from this game. We mentioned early on the Georgia defense. I believe a defensive lineman causes a fumble. Asher Allen, a.k.a. Alan Asher from Vern Lundquist. He recovers it, gives Georgia a good field position. Then we got to talk about this play. We got to show this play. We got to break down this play. Noshawn Marino scores on a short touchdown run, 1-yard touchdown run to give Georgia an early lead. And then we're going to play the clip, All Hell Breaks Loose.
Formation again, power to the left side on 3rd and goal. Marino up over the top. Did he break the plane? Yes. Georgia, touchdown. And here comes the entire team. Watch this for excessive celebration. We may have 15 hankies in the air on this one. I can't believe this.
This was planned. This was absolutely planned. Mark Richt decided that he is going to try to fire his team up. He's tired of Florida having the psychological advantage. He's willing to give up the penalty. Look at that. That was a planned move.
I feel like between Vern and Gary gets more of the grief and is the lesser liked of the two. That might have been his best call because he recognized right away that they wanted to do this. They planned on doing this. Kipp, do you remember that moment when it happened? Do you remember any kind of reaction when that went down?
I mean, there was a lot of queso that just went flying around the taco Mac I was at. I could tell you that much. It was just pandemonium there. And I couldn't hear the call. So I didn't know, but that's as professional as it gets. That's why I mentioned to you before we did the show, this is why I think one of their best calls, because throughout the game, zero hesitation. They just immediately recognize these kinds of things. And in that moment, in a just pure chaotic moment that we have yet to see since and haven't ever seen, there's no hesitation from him. He just knows immediately. And they perfect camera work segue right to Mark Richt there on the sideline. It was just I would not change a thing about that call. And I think that Rick does Tracy Wolfson dirty right there later, because she's yeah, Rick says this wasn't planned at all. But Gary knew it right there in the moment. How do you that quickly just point out, this is a planned thing? This is something Mark Richt had on? Because, what is Mark Richt known for? Is he, just, Kirby Smart, where you could see his emotions on the sideline at all times? Is he, a coach that's willing to do anything? No, Mark Richt's the nice guy. He's always been known as the nice guy. Everyone that brings up how big religion in his life, all these different aspects of Mark Richt as a coach. This is the moment that just stands out in his career. Is not lining up with how everyone describes Mark Richt as a coach. And so, like, just for Gary to immediately know, like, he planned that. Like, he wanted to get his team fired up. It's just one of the best, like, that's a Hall of Fame broadcast moment, in my opinion. And as we're discussing this, like, you can't mention this rivalry without mentioning this celebration. So for him to get that call, I mean, it's as a broadcaster, you have to find that balance between letting a moment breathe or analyzing it. And I think he picked that, like, he just nailed it as far as saying, yeah, like, guys, you were watching something that was at least semi-planned, and, like, it's an insane moment. I think that was just so impressive in my opinion. And that moment, like, right after that, when Vern just says that looked like a Mormon tabernacle breakout, like, that's the perfect, like, Vern comeback, like, bringing you back in, just laughing about it. I think overall, like, that is college football right there. That was just like the crazy, like, you can't get that anywhere else.
This kind of steps on best calls that we'll do in a minute, but you mentioned Tracy Wolfson at one point is like, yeah, that wasn't planned. A source told me that wasn't planned. And Vern just immediately goes, I don't think that was extemporaneous. Like, he was just, like, convinced, like, no. And then to that point, Tracy gets Mark Richt at halftime, and he said, quote, I told them if they didn't get a penalty for a celebration after the first score, I was going to be mad at them. And, like, that's about, like, exactly, that's how, Coach Rick's not telling you to do this, but I'm going to be mad at you if you don't do this. Ben, what do you remember being there, what that moment was like?
Well, I told earlier, like, my defining memory is just how pissed off my buddy was and how much he thought that Mark Richt was, like, the, crudest coach that ever lived, because that they would do this in this moment. I do love, like, sort of the saga watching the broadcast of Tracy coming in being like, I don't think that he told them to do that specifically, and Vern being like, I think Gary was like, I'm not saying I'm calling Mark Richt a liar, but I don't know that I believe that. Like, and then as matter of fact as Mark Richt was in that halftime interview, not saying, hey, I told the entire team to run out there and do that, but more or less they accomplished what I was looking for. And then they got their money's worth, because then Massaquoi also gets the penalty after the next one too. From watching this on the broadcast, because I didn't remember this part of it, you could see this coming with a couple moments before this happened. The first sack of the game, Marcus Howard sacks Tim Tebow, first play of the game, and immediately does, like, the most aggressive gator chomp mid-game that I think I've ever seen. Like, this is first play, gets the sack, and, like, almost breaks his shoulders off by how hard he's doing the gator chomp. That's sign number one. Then on Georgia's possession, when I think it was maybe 4 or 5 plays before they actually punch it in, and this happens, Noshawn Moreno has, like, a 7 or 8 yard run on first down with a little spin move. And then at the end of the play, him and a Florida defensive back get up in each other's faces. And then he just looks at him. They yell at each other. And then he just daps him up and walks right back to the huddle. And Vern says at the time, like, he calls Noshawn Moreno excitable. He's like, isn't it this excitable freshman, as he's dapping up the Florida defensive player? And, like, watching the Marcus Howard moment and the Noshawn Moreno moment, you could just tell that the volume was sky high at Georgia right there. Like, they were ready. They were like, we got to get in the end zone, because we are ready for this moment that's going to come when we score our first touchdown. So I didn't remember this at all from the time it happened, but rewatching the game, I was like, yeah, Marcus Howard and Noshawn Moreno were at a level on the first 2 possessions where you could sort of see that something like this was coming, which is fun to watch on the repeat.
And something I had forgotten about that kind of, I think, minimized the damage of those penalties. Florida got a penalty on that kick return and very much affected what, Florida probably would have been right around midfield. So I think that kind of helped. But I'm going to kind of just leave this up for either of y'all to take. But there is part of me, and I think even at the time, if I'm remembering right, I'm sure my dad was like, don't piss Florida off. Like, what are y'all doing? Guys, what happens if Georgia loses this thing like 31-7? I mean, this had the opportunity to really blow up in Georgia's face.
Well, completely. And when you watch it, like to your point, Florida has the 15-yard penalty on the kickoff that then puts it back at like the 33, I want to say, instead of around midfield. That would have been totally different. And then I know we haven't talked about the Massaquoi play yet, and we will. But after his touchdown, he gets the penalty. And Florida, I think Brandon James returns the kick to like across midfield, and Florida's across midfield before, I think, did they end up fumbling? Maybe that was when Asher, I can't remember what happened. Maybe that was the play where they had the bad snap, where they put the running back, they do the bad snap over his head, where they did some weight. Urban Meyer doesn't get enough flack for how too cute he got at times during that game. Rewatching that, I was just like, Urban, what are you doing, dude? You've got Tim Tebow. I would have given the ball to Percy Harvin 95 times during that game, with every time he touched it, something good happened. But like Florida screwing up the following kickoff there, and then them messing it up when they're deep in Georgia territory after the Massaquoi touchdown. Like the game could have gone a lot different than it did if Florida didn't make some early game blunders.
Yeah, Urban was too cute while also trying to have looks that could kill the entire game. Every time it cut to him, it looked like he was just MFing. I know after that running back fumbled the Wildcat, he was like, what the F?
And are we going to talk about that play more?
Go ahead.
Well, I didn't know if we were going to pull that one up. I didn't want to like do it prematurely, but like, I don't know. What's y'all's opinion on that? I felt like it was a bad snap, and you shouldn't be expecting a running back to be able to make that play. Urban treated the guy like he never deserved to be on a football field again after it goes over his head. I kind of sided with the running back on that one. It's like you're running Tim Tebow out in motion, just standing in a weird spot on the field as it is, and then a center has a bad snap, which he had multiple during the course of that game. Like, I was not putting that one on that running back.
I was with Ben on that. Kipp, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Gary called him out for being too finesse like 6 or 7 times in this game. And I think, I mean, you knew your quarterback was banged up. And so it's actually funny because you talk about just the fact that, you know, Cam Newton's there on the sideline and what they had and what they never really got to utilize there as far as, I mean, we've seen some backup quarterbacks have complete duds in these games, but then we've also seen Florida go out there with like 3 backup quarterbacks and rotate them in and beat Georgia. Again, everything's kind of everything changes in Jacksonville in this series, but I think overall, like for me, Georgia still came in as like 8-point underdogs in this game because it's like they're never going to win it. So I'm not going to say that it was like some like masterclass move by Rick, and it kind of shows like sometimes he didn't have full control in the team because he tells them to do something, but you can like, he didn't plan on everybody going out there, you know, like he just said, guys, earn it. And he may have just met the guys on the field. And the fact that like they just all run out there, like somewhere in that locker room, they're just like, we're all going to go out there. And I think, but for me, it's like, you got to fire these guys up because this series has been a joke. And so I think it flipped the script a little bit. And I mean, Florida still, we know what happens the next year. So like, they still get theirs, but it's just, I think you don't do that if Tebow is not injured the week before. And then I think I forgot this earlier when we're talking about how you know it's 2007. Like Georgia had the bye week this time, and they spent a lot of time talking about finally Georgia's got the bye week before instead of both teams having the bye week. So I think that kind of culminated in like Mark Richt's willing to take a chance, a penalty chance, because he's like, this quarterback's banged up. We got the bye week. This is it. We're going. He just moved all his chips in. One of those moments to where you just, again, like I said, it's one of the. Is it an act of desperation? Is it something you should do all the time? Is there a little bit of like black jersey in it? You know, where he's just like, let's just get these guys hyped. Sure, but for this game, to an extent, it worked.
Also, not to give Gary and Vern too hard of a time here over this one, but one thing that I found so funny as this is happening, they run 50 guys onto the field, and then I forgot this part of it, but that Sturdivant gets the separate penalty, like they get the celebration penalty, and then he gets like the chomp and taunting, kind of shaking his hips penalty as well. And Vern and Gary are basically like, well, Mark Richt knew they were going to get the one penalty. I don't think he was expecting the second penalty. And I was kind of like, well, when 50 guys run on the field, like you're lucky you only got 2 penalties. Like, I don't know what, like the distinction that they decided to make. Like, okay, so what Sturdivant did was like so separate that it needed to be an additional penalty beyond what they were already going to get. But like Vern and Gary being like, well, Richt couldn't have seen this second penalty coming. It's like, well, the entire team ran on the field. He probably could have seen any punishment coming, whatever the referees decided to do, and he probably didn't care a whole lot, regardless of what they were going to do.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the plays of the Mark Richt era. You just think about it. And it's even funny when they review that touchdown, and it's like how would they have handled it had they overturned that? I don't know exactly how they would have done it.
I remember that at the time. Like, I don't remember exactly when instant replay became a thing, but it was relatively recent prior to that. And I remember being in the stands watching that and everyone talking about like, well, if this happened, 24 months ago or whatever the timeline was, we wouldn't be doing this. But I remember how stressed, because in the on the broadcast, it's very obvious he gets through. There's no sweat. But I remember being in the stands and nobody knew. Like they weren't doing replays on the big screen the way that they do now, where everything's as obvious. And I remember nobody really knew, and everyone was sweating out that instant replay review. My gosh, what would have happened if that had gotten overturned?
All right, some of the other biggest moments. So Florida responded after that score. They wound up scoring a touchdown, but then Georgia gets the ball back, and they strike right away with Matthew Stafford and Muhammad Massaquoi.
Down in 12, a loss of 2, ball at the 16. Stafford with a play fake, will throw for the first time in the ball game, has a man open. Massaquoi! Now he's got some room. Massaquoi all the way, Georgia touchdown. 84 yards. He's had trouble over the years holding on to the football. He had to really stretch for this one.
Yeah, he drops this one. No, he might just want to keep running out the tunnel because you cannot throw a ball, and Stafford got rocked on the throw by Harvey, I believe. See, that's why I like, Florida's going to be fired up anyway. You might as well call them out because you're in for a battle anyway. And I think Georgia has said, we need to score. Let's do it.
Massaquoi's name, I think, just really set up for great calls because I think about Munson when they beat Georgia Tech and him saying Massaquoi. But Kipp, we talked about the gunslinger mentality of Matthew Stafford. That right there, that was the good example of
it. That's why you give him free reign. You just let him rip it. I mean, what a throw. Yeah, Muhammad Massaquoi got done a little bit dirty by Gary talking about the hands there. I get it. I mean, like, he was a really good wide receiver for Georgia. And I think I remember, like, he was drafted by the Browns pretty high, but had a solid career. And still on that play, he's like, glad he caught that one. He would, keep running through the tunnel, which is still a great call. But yeah, that throw is why. I mean, the other throw that comes up, the second throw from Stafford is the Stafford experience. But like, yeah, that's it. That's why you win a recruiting battle like that, and you bring in Matthew Stafford because he takes the hit and is willing to make a throw like that. And I mean, it was a great call by Bobo. Like, I mean, that was, you dial it up, like you just take that shot. That's just one of those where I think every single drive, that is the play that Georgia fans want Bobo to dial up, regardless of situation. Do that play, and yeah, I mean, that was what one of the longer touchdown throws in Stafford's career, I would imagine. I did not look that up, but I think that's it. Like that kind of sets a tone for Georgia's aggressiveness overall, which I don't think they maintain that throughout the game. And you look at, toward the end of the game and you're like, there shouldn't be a game where Matthew Stafford doesn't have, at least 20 pass attempts, right? Even back then. But with an arm like that, you let him do whatever he wants. That throw was impressive. Just the fact that he gets the look off the play action. I just think, again, that's exactly how you dial up a Bobo pass play.
This was something I considered for how it's 2007. Georgia had 10 straight runs to open this game, but the 11th play, that first pass, is a touchdown. Ben, what do you remember about that play?
Well, I remember the crowd pop and to everything we've talked about with Matthew Stafford. Like, this was one of those throws where it's just beautiful to watch. He had a few moments. I know we'll talk about another one of his touchdowns, which I felt fit this as well. He had a couple third downs across the middle of the field where it's just like, man, when he was hitting strikes, it looked so pretty. And even some of the things that he does in play action, he's still great with sleight of hand to this day. But some of the things he did in play action, the command that he had pre-snap, it's you can see why Matthew Stafford is still playing football 20 years later, because he just had it from day one. I will say the call from Vern is a little probably unfair. You could tell Vern was on the message boards back in the day, or to whatever extent that those existed at the time, because I feel like that was something where Georgia fans were probably whining and complaining about some moments that Massaquoi had, and that had stuck with Vern for that call. Also, the specific verbiage of he's had a lot of trouble through the years holding on to the football. Interesting, given what ultimately ended up happening to Muhammad Massaquoi. Just interesting terminology. I felt, but yeah, great throw from Stafford, and Muhammad Massaquoi, one of my all-time favorite Georgia players because of what you said, Jordan. Just saying Muhammad Massaquoi's name. I was watching the rewatch, and my wife could overhear it. She wasn't watching it with me, but she heard Muhammad Massaquoi's name, and just from the other room, she was just like, man, the Georgia had some awesome names back then.
100%. All right, a play I'm not going to play back, but I do want to mention Matthew Stafford's pick six from the end zone, and this is one of the best calls that I wrote down. I believe this was Gary who said, quote, 2 passes, both caught, one for the red and one for the blue. Damn, just put it all out there, Gary. That tied at 14-14. I want to jump ahead. I think this is an early fourth quarter. There's some other plays that I think are worthy of being shouted out. Brandon Sutherland's touchdown catch in the third quarter, early third quarter. It's kind of a situation where Georgia may go for it up 21-17. They score the touchdown third down, don't got to worry about it. It's 28-17 instead. But I want to shout out the play that Kipp kind of mentioned earlier with Rennie Curran. Florida's going for it on fourth down. They really need to keep this drive alive. Tebow, not 100%, but they're going to try to do something, and this is what happened.
2 seconds. Hand it off. No, sir. No, sir.
You can't tell me that Florida would not run Tebow if it wasn't for his shoulder.
The ball goes over on downs. They hand it off on the attempted sweep. Rennie Curran makes the tackle.
Well, it was supposed to be a fake reverse to Harvin. Caldwell's here. Harvin is going to go back. Watch. Not enough time. Actually bumps into Keyston Moore. Oh, bad game for Keyston Moore here. Watch him bump in to Harvin, and that's what really did not allow the pitch on the play. I think that was going to be a reverse.
Gary realizing in real time, Keyston Moore, man. And I don't know, for real, I did not remember Keyston Moore's name before this game. And after I watched this game, I said, oh, that's why I don't really remember Keyston Moore.
That was the play where it's just like, what are you doing? And I get it. Like Tebow's shoulder was hurt. We heard it 45 times during the broadcast. It didn't stop them from running him the whole possession before once they got down into the red zone. Like they just got too cute on multiple occasions. And I agree. I think they were trying to do the reverse to Percy Harvin, and Percy Harvin might still be running to this day if they are able to get him the ball. So I don't hate the idea of finding a way to get Percy Harvin the football, but just like, you got Tim Tebow and Percy Harvin, just give him the football. Like, I don't care who it is, just like give him the football. But yeah, they made some mistakes in that one, and poor Keyston Moore, man. I feel like this game probably gets more rerun than most games that Keyston Moore played in. And my goodness, Vern and Gary kind of took him to the woodshed there on that one, didn't they?
I'll cover some more things with best calls, but for me, that was, I thought, the best call, just Vern's "no, sir." And like that to me is a great example of a broadcaster knowing that you don't have to say a ton. It's just, this is a play that's, could very well swing the game. They didn't get it. Kipp, what did you think about that moment? And as we mentioned earlier, Penn and I were talking about, this game was a lot tighter. That's a 4-point game right there in that moment. That wound up really looming large when Georgia won this thing.
Yeah, and Keyston Moore actually scored 16 touchdowns in college. He ran for 1,281 yards. So, like, he was a big part or a significant part of their offense. And it just kind of goes to show that I think Urban's plan A, plan B, and plan C went out the window early. Like, Tim Tebow was their running back. I mean, that was it. Like, he was their main offense was him running the ball. And, they had to throw huge chunks of the playbook out because Tebow can't run. Moore has the fumble early in the game and gets benched for most of the game, right? And then Percy Harvin, who is like one of the most dynamic players in college football, and we're just talking about like legends of this decade. Like Percy Harvin was as talented as football player as you could get. You give him that ball, it's like people are like, they're scared. They already don't have the angle on him. He's like, we're talking about like Georgia now with like Zachariah Branch. Like, I'm sure like the way you use him is like just a complete evolution of how Percy Harvin got used all the time. Just give him the ball. He's banged up during this game too. So I think like Urban gets cute because he's like, I can't do all my favorite plays. But when Caldwell went in motion, you could tell Rennie had that snuff. He already knew it, that it was jet sweep. He takes a perfect angle to the ball. And I mean, that was it. Like, obviously Renee Curran made the play there. And at that point, they're like, oh, like this guy's in the game. That's the first time he's mentioned in this game. He'd already had, I think, 4 tackles in the game, but like that was his big play and his big moment as a freshman. But he played it perfectly. He was right there. So I think for me, like that was kind of Rennie's like welcome to college football. He had like I said in the Tennessee game, came in. But I think, I just think for that, it's like you're kind of looking and going, why isn't Georgia up by 3 scores? They don't have any of their, like, they're going to this part of the playbook. And Georgia's able to just, key in on Percy Harvin's banged up. We're not worried about Tebow overall. Like the throwing, I mean, like he was just not able to do what he did to every other team that year, basically. Like Georgia just got a different version of him. And that's why you're able to, like, your eyes, the eye candy, you don't get tricked by that because you're already like, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. So Rennie, as a true freshman, is able to go, I know exactly where the ball is going. And he made the play. I mean, that was obviously the biggest part of that. So that was the last of like my memorable plays of this game. And I do think, like I said, just one of my favorite name pronunciations, in a game that had no shortage of them. And like even earlier, you're talking about the Stafford pick. That's another name pronunciation. I'll get into that in my favorite calls. It's one of mine, but I just think that play stood out because, like I said, for me, Rennie Curran, he's my first high school to college football moment, and I think that was just a big moment for him. For Georgia fans, he'll always be one of like every Georgia fan's favorite players because that kind of locked it in. Georgia's actually going to win this football game.
To the point that Kipp made about Tim Tebow not really being a threat, coming into that game, he was averaging nearly 18 carries a game. He winds up with 13, and I have to imagine a few of those are counted as such because of sacks. Now, shortly after that turnover on downs, Georgia stretches its lead. Earlier this season, Georgia had beaten Alabama with Stafford to Mikey Henderson, and we get another glimpse at those two hooking up here.
On first down, Stafford pulls it back, wants to go deep. Deep left side, battle for it. Caught! Touchdown, Georgia! Mikey Henderson. 53 yards. Stafford to Henderson. The same combination that gave the Georgia Bulldogs an overtime win earlier this year.
One of my favorite calls when I played was to go after a defensive back who just got a penalty. Mike Bobo goes right after Wandy Pierre-Louis with a deep ball. Now, it was pretty good coverage. I'm not saying that, but I love that strategy. A defensive back doesn't want to get two penalties. You should get an easy release.
Gary had just done something that I really enjoyed, what he would do when he would call games where there had been pushing and shoving between a receiver and a corner. They throw a penalty, and he breaks down the play, and he's like, oh, you can do it the first time. You can't do it the second. Like, he gets really into, like, oh, can't do it again. And Kipp, this is another example of Matthew Stafford wanting to show off that big arm, and, man, he does it with a big throw to Henderson.
Yeah, similar catch that they mentioned, that Alabama overtime throw, just an over the shoulder, over the DB's shoulder there. And you can, when you're a wide receiver with Matthew Stafford as your quarterback, that. Like, you're running her out, you're like, I may not really have separation, but that ball might be coming to me. I have to be ready. So, credit looking back and at the right time. And yeah, he got picked on one. He got picked on that game because I don't remember if he started, but they had Joe Hayden on the other side. You don't hear his name mentioned in this game for a reason. Like, this wasn't like one of Florida's best defenses, and they also talk about that. Like, they're banged up. Jermaine Cunningham is one of the guys I think's out. One of the Pouncey brothers, but they have Derek Harvey, Brandon Spikes. I think Major Wright is on that team at the time. Like, it's not the loaded defense you're used to, and then those guys were banged up as well. So, like, I think Georgia knew, like, these are the guys we can pick on during this game. And then, they went to Wandy, multiple times. And I think, he made a play earlier in the game, but they still weren't afraid. Like, they weren't afraid of their guys being able to make plays against them. Stafford definitely wasn't. He didn't care. So I just think, again, that's just, I don't know if that's, do you want to make him that throw all the time? I don't think that, you really do, but he's still going to do it. Like, that was the Matthew Stafford. He's like, I'm letting that thing rip. And for now, we're covering a Georgia football team where I think that's what the fan base wants, for better, for worse. Like, are they willing to take the interceptions with it? I don't think so. I don't think the Junkyard is ready. If Gunnar Stockton lets it rip like Matthew Stafford did, I don't know that they would enjoy the experience, because he makes throws that, again, you can only even attempt if you have a top 10 arm strength of all time. And that's where, like, my mind goes when I think of Matthew Stafford. I start thinking, like, where does he rank in the NFL's all-time, like, top 10 arm? He's in there. Everyone goes to, like, Elway and Marino and now with, Josh Allen, guys like that. But, like, Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen are making these off-platform throws because Matthew Stafford showed you it could be done. Like, he is the guy that at any angle, any arm angle, he could just get that thing 50 yards down the field. And that was one of those. He just whips it right down there.
Want to move on to one of the final touchdown in this game, and a guy we really haven't talked about a ton, but deserves a lot of shine and a lot of credit, and it's Knowshon Moreno. I mean, they wind up being in a situation where Thomas Brown, Craig Lumpkin get hurt. They're really relying on him. I mentioned they started the game ground and pound, really running the ball, and Knowshon was huge. He had that first touchdown. He had another score, but late in the going, Florida's still kind of hanging around. But Knowshon and Georgia have a drive where they really break the back of Florida, and fittingly it's Knowshon who ends it with another score.
Against this Florida team. Here's Stafford. Marino. Got it. Touchdown, Georgia. Since 1990, the Georgia Bulldogs have defeated Florida twice. 1997, when they were 20-point underdogs, 2004, and they lead by 11. They are reviewing the play upstairs.
Ben, these days there's a Twitter account that's That Guy Rocked, or That Dude Rocked, and it's basketball players, football players, whoever. Knowshon Moreno, that dude rocked.
Yeah, man. I mean, him in this game in particular really rocked. I mean, I know we'll talk about stats specifically, so I don't want to give away his exact line, but like, I remember him having a good game. I didn't remember just how much he was used in this game, and his little like first defender quick spin move, his spin move just looked different than a lot of other guys. Like, it's not this like long wind up type of thing. Like, it was just like this quick little, it was almost like a video game spin move where he's just like quickly spinning and he's already like direct north to south the second that he finishes his spin move. Him switching the field entirely and then just like diving into the end zone on a couple of different occasions was, I mean, he was just so fun to watch. But in this game in particular, that dude definitely rocked. Him and I know I already brought up Percy Harvin. I know this is a Georgia rewatch. Percy Harvin rocked, dude. Every single time he touched the ball, I just kept saying, my goodness, I just want to watch Percy Harvin run with the football over and over and over again. But I felt the same way about Knowshon Moreno, and it was a pleasure getting to rewatch both of those guys tote the rock.
Percy Harvin was very much like a player we'll talk about in our next episode, where I swear every time he touched the ball, I was like, oh, I have a issue remembering specific plays of older games, but it's like, does he score here? Like, that was kind of where Percy Harvin was. Ben, any other big moments we didn't shout out that you want to mention before we move to the next category?
I mean, not really. I think that you hit the big ones. One moment that I did love was Matthew Stafford. There was a play where Florida jumped into the neutral zone. Matthew Stafford, the center recognizes it. I think it was Velasco. Matt Stafford recognizes it. He immediately kneels, and like nobody else out there had any clue what was going on. And then the Florida defensive players just smash through the Georgia offensive line, tackle Matt Stafford. Gary and Vern didn't really know what in the world was going on as it was unfolding. But then when they rewatch it, they were like, oh, this should have been a neutral zone infraction. It's like, well, I mean, Matt Stafford kneeled it and is now just getting slaughtered behind the line of scrimmage after he'd already kneeled it. That was like oh, wait a minute, Matt Stafford is wise beyond his years type of moment. Like, you don't see college seniors today making plays like that. You certainly don't see guys that were as young as Stafford was in that moment making heads up plays like that. So that was certainly one. I wanted to make sure to call out Urban Meyer's boneheaded plays in short yardage situations, because this was a Urban Meyer versus Mike Bobo fest. And you would have thought that they were flipped the way that people talk about Mike Bobo in some of those spots now. Like, if Mike Bobo had done with Cash Jones in those spots what Urban Meyer did, I wouldn't have been able to be on the Junkyard for weeks the way that people would have been reacting. So I definitely did want to call that out. I feel like there was maybe one other thing that I wanted to mention, but I'm blanking on it right now. So I think you hit the high points for me.
I will say this, and maybe I'm misremembering, and it might have even been that play. Stafford would always take a knee if he got the defense to jump, whereas I feel like I was always taught, hey, just throw it up. It's a free play. So as a fan, that used to piss me off. I'm like, just throw the ball, because I swear there was one time that he did it, and they wound up having a loss of down.
Well, that's the thing. Whereas if you don't get the call the way that you should, you end up getting the loss of down. In this instance, it ends up working out because you get half the distance to the goal, which was nice. But to your point, just let it ride. Give Massaquoi a shot to go prove Vern wrong again. Show that he can actually hold on to the football.
Kipp, any other big moments, big plays that we didn't highlight?
I don't think the quarterbacks really, this might be it's 2007 moment. Like Aaron Rodgers is the one that like really like got that started where if you knew you had the free play, you always threw it down the field. To your point, like a Matthew Stafford throw down the field, who knows where that thing's going? Someone might get hurt. Someone might, I mean, that again, could be talking about 2 or 3. Like if you don't get the call, you're looking at it differently. For me, yeah, I'm just, I'm still in awe of Noshawn. Like that. I'm still thinking about that play. Like, he loved to get airborne. That like he was the running back at Georgia who went airborne like more than any other player, and it's like such a fearless position to do that. And I'm just thinking about also the fact of where Georgia was at running back at the time. Like you mentioned, like Thomas Brown had a broken collarbone. Craig Lumpkin, knee injury, out for the season. And 2007, like they brought Caleb King, who was like at the time like the most hyped running back prospect ever signed by Georgia at a Parkview. Like he was on the trip, but you know what? You couldn't play him because you know why? You can't burn that red shirt. The red shirt's in charge. And I will talk about redshirt a little bit later and how I feel about that in this specific game and Mark Richt overall. But yeah, I mean, like Noshawn just went in and he's like, it's got to be me, and he made it happen. So great. We'll talk about him a little bit more. But yeah, that play was just kind of like it's one of the best performances in this rivalry game, and made what should not have been a close game, gave Georgia a little bit of breathing room there.
The red shirt rule definitely makes sense as far as some of the things that let you know it was 2007. You couldn't play at all. You couldn't play a snap if you were in a red shirt back then. And Kipp mentioned Noshawn going airborne. The two things I think of in that instance is this game, and it's 2008 at Arizona State, him diving into the end zone for a big score there. Best calls, I'll run through mine really quickly. The two best calls that I think kind of mattered in this game were the first touchdown where they kind of broke down, Mark Richt making that decision to let everybody celebrate. And then the no sir on the turnover on downs. A couple of other quick ones I wanted to mention. Vern Lundquist calls Brandon James, the Florida running back, quote, a tiny mite, because he was a smaller running back. We mentioned that he mentioned Jason Johnson singing in a choir with Jennifer Hudson, although he calls her Jennifer Holiday. At one point, a Florida receiver misses a pass from Tim Tebow. Cornelius Ingram right through the mitts. And I mentioned earlier Gary Danielson pointing out when a receiver and a corner are fighting, you can hit the guy the first time. You can't be the guy who hits him last. Kipp, what were your best calls? Anything you want to point out?
They perfectly set up the Stafford pick six. Vern sets it up. Stafford, the passer, has thrown one pass. Tebow, the runner, has yet to run. And then he immediately goes, Wandy Louis-Pierre, touchdown Florida. And again, his name is Wandy Pierre-Louis. They struggled with that name throughout the game. And then you get from Gary, the one thing that everyone is afraid of with Stafford is he loves his arm too much. He thinks he could throw it from any position. He got caught on that one. And they come out of commercial. Matthew Stafford, both of his throws today have gone for touchdowns. So I just think that was one of my favorite calls of the game. Gary, I think later in the game, he goes to the Tebow attack track. He says, nothing. He's showing all the different runs. Nothing. We've extracted the attack track here. So love that because, on air, that's tough to say. Gary calls out the refs for missing neutral zone encroachment with 3 minutes left in the second quarter. Georgia gets a false start on the next play. Vince Vance sounds like a leader of a rock and roll group from the 60s. Then Gary, right now he does not want to be the lead. He'd like to be the background drummer or bass guy because he's got the lead right there shifting up front. And Vern gets that reference in. Dallas folk will remember Vince Vance and the Valiants. That was just a great, you got to have these two guys in the booth, that kind of chemistry where you could just roll like the color, the play-by-play analysis, like color, like they just flowed perfectly right there for me. And then in the fourth quarter, it's early in the fourth quarter, Tebow has a 34-yard play action pass to Percy. And Vern immediately catches it. He goes, he looked like David Green right there with the play action because he holds it, behind the back, obviously opposite side. But I just think like immediately catching that in this game, this rivalry game was perfect because that's what every Georgia fan, you're watching the replay, you're going to be like, man, like that's perfectly behind the back there. And who did that better than David Green? So those are some of my favorite calls from the game.
There was another play I was going to mention. I believe it was to Sean Bailey. There's a third down, and Florida has man-on-man, and they back the guy up. And Georgia gets the third down, and Gary Danielson is beside himself. He's like, why did they give him that much room on third down? I thought Gary was very good in this game. I'm sure that a lot of Georgia fans will disagree because that's just how that goes. Ben, best calls, any that you want to shout out?
Well, a lot of them we've mentioned already through the key moments. I thought everything that went along with the storming of the field was fantastic. We might have 15 hankies in the air. This was planned, like everything that both of them did during that one. Also, shout out to the production team on that to go with the overhead shot as Georgia players started running. We didn't call that out, and that needed to get its love because I don't know that the visual of it would have been as great without that overhead shot. I know I've mentioned this already. I know that this hadn't happened prior to this play, but the exact wording of he's had trouble holding onto the football through the years when the guy eventually ends up having 4 fingers amputated from his left hand. I was just, that's some dark humor on my end, but I was just like, man, we could have picked, I know he didn't know it at the time, but could we have just picked different words for historical purposes? I did love the call out of the Alabama overtime play by when Mikey Henderson has his touchdown catch, because I thought the same thing as I was watching it. Like I didn't remember I remember that Mikey Henderson play against Alabama vividly. I don't remember that play in the Florida game looking so similar from start to finish as it did in that game. So I thought that was cool that Vern had the wherewithal to reference something that had happened earlier in the season. I thought after Noshawn's touchdown, the call that he had since 1990, the Georgia Bulldogs have defeated Florida twice and they lead by 11. I thought it was just nice, cut to the point, getting like, hey, you're feeling in this moment that Georgia is finally going to do this. They haven't done it yet officially in this game, but kind of the magnitude of the situation, I thought he did great. And then on that Florida fumble to end the game, which I don't think we showed the video on, but when Florida ends up fumbling to end the game, Gary just lays. I don't want to say Gary had money on Florida in this game, but there were some moments where I was like, it sort of feels like Gary's got money on Florida in this game because he's very irritated with the way that the coaching staff is doing things. But he says, you can put that one on the Florida coaching staff. You can put that one on the Florida coaching staff. And then when they watched the replay of it, the center has the bad snap. And he says, I think he's like losing his mind. He's like, I think the center might have thought Tebow was under center. How could he possibly think that? He hasn't been under center twice in his entire career. And it's like, I don't think the center thought that he was under center. Like, I don't know what made Gary feel that way. I think it was a bad snap. It wasn't his only bad snap. They had a bad snap over the running back's head earlier in the game. It wasn't a great game from the Florida center on that one, but he just rips into the coaching staff, and then he says that the center thought that Tebow was under center when in no world was Tebow with a hurt shoulder going to be under center in that spot. So I don't know why he thought that was the case, but I did think that was a hilarious ending call to the game.
The Muhammad Massaquoi thing, especially watching it back almost 20 years later. I don't know if either of you guys ever saw a Hot Tub Time Machine, but when they go to the pass, they see a bellhop who they know only has one arm, and they just keep thinking there's going to be this event that they see where the guy gets his arm ripped off, and it keeps, they almost, nope. And that's just kind of what comes to mind.
I hesitated even wanting to bring that up because it is sad. As I heard it, it's my morbid brain, but like I heard Vern say that, and I was just like, "Oh, like I'm uneasy." Just I know you didn't know what would eventually happen, but just you describing it that way, given the player, just made me uncomfortable. And so now I'm making everybody uncomfortable by bringing it up like 7 times.
Let's go to the next category. Stellar stats. I'm going to run through these and we'll talk about them. Noshawn Moreno, 33 carries for 188 yards and 3 touchdowns. 42 points for Georgia, the most points Georgia had scored against Florida since 1982. This was the first time in this rivalry's history that both teams cleared 30 points in the same meeting. It happened again in 2010, and that was a game Florida won. Georgia, I mentioned this earlier, had 6 sacks in this game. Florida had allowed just 5 in the previous 7. So, Ben, I'll turn it over to you. Any of those stats really catch your attention? Anything you want to shout out?
Well, the Noshawn stat, I looked at the box score before I watched the game because I was just kind of like, all right, I want to see like what the picture of it is before I watch it so that I knew some things to be looking for. And I had forgotten how injured Georgia's running back room was coming into this game. So when I first saw Noshawn 33 carries, I was like, man, Bobo, you were trying to kill this guy. Like, what are you doing? What are you running him into the ground? In retrospect, I realized he had no choice really other than to do that. But yeah, 33 carries, 188 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, we've mentioned Massaquoi and Mikey Henderson both of them only had 1 catch in the entire game. Massaquoi had the 1 catch for 84 yards and touchdown. Mikey Henderson had the 1 catch for 53 yards and the touchdown. So that certainly stood out to me. And then you've mentioned it a couple of times now, Jordan, but Tim Tebow, and I know this is factoring in sacks, but like he has the 13 carries for negative 15 yards rushing. He got sacked more times in that game than he had been sacked in the entire season prior to it. And so, found it interesting just because we've talked a lot about the Georgia pass rush in the Kirby Smart era over the last couple of years and where the sack numbers aren't necessarily where people want it to be. And it's just funny because I don't sit there and think about the 2007 Georgia defense being this defense that was wildly more successful than some of the recent Georgia defenses that we've seen. But that just goes to show like sometimes where you put together a defense is a little bit different, and it's not every defense is going to look exactly the same. But yeah, Georgia, man, it reminded me kind of like the Texas game a couple of years ago, where it's like you might not even be thought of as this dominantly pass rush defense, but in one game, man, they really took that pass rush really took the game over.
Yeah, I think when you look at those 2 eras, I think Georgia's pass rush was much better. But even in the games we've watched for this podcast series, Georgia's secondary a little bit more iffy than you've seen during the Kirby Smart era. Kipp, talk about that pass rush in this game. I mean, they knew that Tebow was not 100%, and as this game wore on, man, it seemed like they timed being able to get to him well over and over.
Yeah. Credit that Willie Martinez defense for knowing they could be aggressive. You had a young Geno Watkins in there, like the Geno Atkins and Jeff Owens. Like that's just one of the OG Georgia D tackle duos. And I think with Marcus Howard, you had Rod Battle in there. Like those are Jerry Swin, I think, had a sack in this game. They kind of knew where they had the advantage, and they knew like they weren't going to be tested down the field. Everything was probably is going to be horizontal. You had to make sure you're watching, like the eye candy in that way. And I mean, Urban kind of helped them out a little bit by doing a lot of unnecessary formations. It allowed them just to kind of pin their ears back and play old-fashioned aggressive football. Which I'll tell you, like a lot of times, Georgia, that kind of mentality undid Georgia in a lot of these games. But in this situation, it was just dialed up perfectly for Georgia just to be able to not have to like rush 5 or 6, not have to have costly pass rush for decisions. You can get there with four and sometimes 5, and they did. They took advantage of that throughout the game. I think that kind of stood out to me. Like the fact that Stafford only threw 18 passes in this game is just something like he only 3 wide receivers caught passes for him. As many like he threw 1 pass to a tight end. He hit 3 different running backs, but it was Muhammad, it was Sean Bailey, and Mikey Henderson. That was it. And I'm just kind of dumbfounded by that. But then I'm also thinking, yeah, who was the next wide receiver for Georgia? Like Chris Durham was a little young then. It wasn't really in the rotation. Kenneth Harris really didn't do a lot. Got banged up a little bit as well. You had a young Tony Wilson out there. Young Bruce Figgins as well at tight end. It makes sense that Brennan Sutherland was such a big focal point of this offense. He was the most productive fullback at Georgia. I mean, think ever. You had a young Sean Chappis behind him, a local guy there as well, who had a great career at fullback. So he had as much talent as fullback there, I mean, as you did anywhere. So I get it. It's just mind-boggling to me that's – I mean, next season is a completely different story of what you have on that roster. But I think that's why you saw Noshawn being asked to tote the rock, because it's like, well, we got this all-world arm talent, but we don't have a lot of guys we trust down the field, and to not lose that 50-50 battle. So, again, that stat kind of stood out to me. And then they showed a stat at the end of the game. No head coach, it was very specific, no head coach had beat Mark Richt 3 years in a row. And in his career, I think only one ended up doing that, and that was Steve Spurrier at South Carolina. He's the only coach to beat Mark Richt 3 years in a row. So I think that stat stood out to me as well, because again, he lost to Florida, but he had different coaches, and so it's still an impressive stat. It's still not a bragging right that he could have, and only one coach. He'll probably if there's one person who knows that stat in this world, it's probably not Mark Richt. It's 100% Steve Spurrier. Steve Spurrier knows he's the only one who's done that. But I think that stat stood out at the end. So overall, again, that brings up this game and how big of a game it was overall for the rivalry.
Wanted to shout out Brandon Sutherland. I actually went to high school with my older sister at GAC, so shout out to Brandon Sutherland. All right, what it meant and what it means. So this win gave Georgia the tiebreaker over Florida in the SEC East, but Georgia needed Tennessee to lose to win the division. Didn't happen. Tennessee wins the East. They play LSU in the SEC title game. Georgia won its final 4 games this year, including the blackout against Auburn, but Tennessee won out as well, so Tennessee goes to Atlanta. Georgia settled for a trip to the Sugar Bowl. It beat Hawaii 41-10 and ended the year 11-2. Florida, meanwhile, basically eliminated from the BCS chase with this loss. Very funny now thinking about 1 or 2. I guess this was their 3rd loss of the regular season. They're out of the title hunt. Florida also wins out. They won its next 4 games, but then in the postseason, they lose to Michigan in the Citrus Bowl. That was Lloyd Carr's final game at Michigan. So question here, and I'll ask Ben first. Kipp kind of alluded to this. Urban Meyer, don't think really cared for that touchdown celebration to start, and you saw it the next 2 times these teams played. Florida beat Georgia 49-10 in 2008. Then they beat them 41-17 the following year. So I got to ask Ben, the celebration, everything that came with it, was it worth it for Georgia?
Yeah, it was worth it. I think it was worth it. For a 20-year span, it was probably pinnacle moment. Like that moment was the pinnacle moment. And there are people that might even still say it's the pinnacle moment when you're talking about Georgia Florida games, even now that Georgia's on this dominant run of their own in that series. So what I also remember is you call out the scores of the next two games. In 2008, at the end of the game, Urban Meyer he had saved up his timeouts, and in the final minute, up like 40, he just kept calling timeouts, almost like being like, hey, just so you know, which I don't really understand the purpose of it, but it was like everyone knew he's doing this as a callback of like, hey, you can, talk your stuff, storm the field, all that stuff. We're about to beat you by 40, and then we're just going to make you sit in it for a little bit in the final minute of this one. So they got their get back, but I would still say it was worth it for Georgia in the end.
I agree with Ben. I mean, it was a situation where we went over how one-sided this was. Georgia had won twice in 17 years. So they needed the spark. They needed to believe. And it's one of those things, too, you're worried about right then. Repercussions afterwards, you don't worry about it. And Urban stayed mad, but he still had to take that L. Kipp, you agree?
Absolutely. Come on. Like, again, if we're looking at this rivalry game and we're talking about the 2 wins in 17 years, what's happened since the game? Well, Georgia's 12-7. They got a 5-game win streak right now, right? I'm sorry, but like nobody, Georgia fans don't really think about those next 2 years for a reason. I mean, why would you? But like even Florida fans, like the reason why this lives on and is worth it is because that Gator stomp lives rent free in all Florida fans. Okay, like they know they remember that moment. And I mean, on the rewatch, it still hit different for everyone. Like for us, like it's just that was one of the best rivalry tilts of this century. One of the best moments. A perfect call, as we said in the booth. Everything just kind of the perfect storm of a college football moment. And when can you remember something like happening at like that early in the game, at the beginning of a game like that, like such a memorable moment? It's always like toward the end of the game. And like the rest of the game, just kind of like we're picking apart things that like, oh yeah, all those happens. None of us had to think about our most memorable moment of this game before we even started the rewatch. So I just think for me, it's just, again, that's the one of the most, if not the most iconic moment of the rivalry of the 21st century. I'll set it there. I mean, there are obviously, if we're going to go back and watch some games in the 80s, 90s is going to be kind of rough. Let's just say early 80s. This moment is the pinnacle of this rivalry. And it's where, again, like I said, Georgia fans were like, okay, like we got this quarterback, we got this young, like we have it in this rivalry to not have to think about, okay, our next win's going to be a decade from now. And so looking back, yeah, they lost a couple, but again, I think it's pre this moment and post this moment when you think about the Georgia-Florida rivalry. And so for that reason, I think it was complete 4D chess. It psychologically just broke Florida that season. And I mean, they had a Heisman winner. And again, they're basically, that took them out of the running. Underdogs, Georgia being underdogs. And we've already broken down the fact that that team has already kind of broken the Florida team. Well, let's not get lost in the minutia here. Like that, I think that celebration just puts the exclamation point on a Georgia win that they needed more than anything.
All right, going on to game MVP. Who do we give the game MVP to? It can be a player, it can be a position group, it can be the coaches. For this one, I'm giving it to Knowshon Moreno. To me, I think you either give it to Knowshon or you give it to the pass rush because of how they affected Tim Tebow. But we talked about how dire the situation was at running back. We talked about how they leaned on him. 33 carries, 188 yards, 3 touchdowns. We want to get guests on here, and I did think about, man, it's almost worth saving this one to try to get Knowshon, and maybe we can do it on another podcast. But, I mean, Ben, this is one of those games with Knowshon. Make sure you unmute. This is like quintessential Knowshon Moreno in my mind.
Yeah, I'd have to give it to him. I mean, if I'm trying to go different, Marcus Howard probably deserves a little bit of credit because the first play of the game really set the tone for everything. But yeah, 33 carries, 188 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's the one, like, if he doesn't stretch it out over the end zone or it's just short or whatever, and then it gets overturned after the storm in the field, like, everything could have looked drastically different. So you got to give it to Noshawn. Probably a little tip of the cap to Mike Bobo, though. What do you say? I mean, 200 rushing, 200 passing, hangs 42 points. I mean, Gary Danielson very clearly said he needed to score 28 points to be able to win the game, and he did 42 just for good measure. So, I think Mike Bobo deserves a little credit for this one too.
Kipp, who you giving MVP to?
Oh, it's got to be Noshawn. He actually, we spent all that time talking, and I mentioned how celebration was worth it. Noshawn saved Mark Richt from that celebration not being worth it. I mean, again, you mentioned how many points Georgia needed to score. Well, Florida scored 30 points in this game, okay? Like, Noshawn had to put the team on his back and ensure that this turned out the way it did. I'd have to go back and see. I think, like, this is peak Noshawn. Like, for me, like, this might be the best game he had at Georgia. And the fact that he only played at Georgia 2 seasons goes back to me mentioning the redshirt rule. And I think this is one of the top 3. I don't know if it's number 1, but like the most boneheaded things Mark Richt's ever done at Georgia was redshirting Noshawn. I get it. Pass rush. You got to be able to, pick up the blitz. I know what running backs have to do at Georgia. I even know, the year before, like, you had Danny Ware, you had Thomas Brown. I get what you had. None of those guys have what Noshawn had. And you knew that early on. You knew that summer. I remember the practices that Noshawn was just, they're like, this guy's different. And they redshirted him. And they redshirted Caleb King. And, he didn't have the career everyone thought he was going to, but still, redshirting running backs, it's mind-boggling to me. You got two of the best years ever from a running back at Georgia, but you only got 2 of them. So yeah, I think that's Noshawn basically saying, I'm only going to have so many games here. I'm going to make the most of it. And they did. They made him the focal point of the offense. And in this game, he rewarded them with, again, one of the best performances in this rivalry, possibly the best game in Noshawn's career. I think it was just the cuts that he made, where like you got your O-line blocking, and then he would take the, a right tackle handoff and then go against the grain immediately. The vision that he had and just the balance was something he hadn't really seen at Georgia in a while. So I think he put it on full display in that game. He's definitely, for me, the MVP of this game. And, just wish you would have got to see him the year before.
Yeah, I remember, I think the G-Day the year before that he showed out, and everybody's like, who is this guy? And then he redshirts, and yeah, so that's how that all played out. All right, guys, final thoughts before we end the first episode of What a Game, WAG. What'd you think about this Georgia-Florida rewatch and doing this going forward? Ben, I'll start with you.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Great idea from you, Jordan. I don't like to give you too much credit too often, but this was a very good idea, and I've enjoyed doing this one. We've already alluded to, we've kind of gotten ahead on another one that we're going to be doing, and I've already done that rewatch and really enjoyed that one too. You picked both of these. I didn't pick either of these games, and both of them are like cornerstone Georgia football memories for me for very different reasons. And so really fun. I'm looking forward to doing more of these. And I think this was the perfect place to start.
Yeah, really enjoyed rewatching this. I've already hit on it a couple times. There's a lot of this game I just did not remember, and I think other folks will have that same experience. And we're in the middle of June. We still got a ways before we get to the season. I thought this would be a fun way to get this thing rolling, to revisit some old games and not talk about lawsuits and not talk about scandal and all that. Let's go rewatch some old games thanks to our friends at CBS. Kipp, any parting thoughts?
I can't imagine how this game would have gone if we had social media the way we do now. The reactions to that celebration would have been fun to watch on the old X.com. All the handles would have been, they would have been discussing and having opinions on that. It's funny, earlier in that week, I remember Mark Rick saying he thought Georgia was close to getting their indoor facility built, and it would open a decade later. So, I just thought that was one more final 2007 moment. Like, that was the big quote of the week, is that we're recruiting from behind, but I think we're going to get that indoor facility soon. And goodness, near future means something very different to the people that told Mark Rick that versus the reality of that situation. But again, this is one of his, I don't know if it's one of his defining wins, but it's definitely just one of the, one of the best moments of that decade overall, outside of a pair of SEC championships. So I think it's, for Georgia fans, it's still one of their favorite memories, even after back-to-back national titles and all the SEC championships that Kirby Smart's won now. It's like that win is still we really showed them, and then that celebration is just so unique. So I think I really enjoyed this rewatch, and knowing that, again, what an incredible game from Noshawn. What a special moment. And I think for us, just watching magic happen with Gary and Vern again, that's really where now I'm excited for some of these other games, because those guys, when they get in their bag, it's like, oh my goodness, what are these goofballs going to do next?
All right, I'll go ahead and tease the next one. We're hoping to maybe do one every 2 or 3 weeks. Now, if the schedule lines up the way we're hoping, I know our next game is going to be 2013 Georgia LSU, a phenomenal game in Sanford Stadium. I think a lot of folks will want to rewatch that, and I encourage you in the next week, go rewatch it. It's on YouTube. The goal right now is to have a very special guest on episode 2. I don't want to promise it. I'm not going to tell you who it is, just in case our schedules fall through. But whether or not the guest appears, that will be the next episode. Super excited to do that one. We'll end the episode there. Thanks everyone who listened to this, who watched this. Again, go check these out on YouTube. Follow along on the Junkyard. We got all the other stuff going on. If you're listening to this on Monday, 60% off sale ends at midnight Eastern time. Jump on board that, because when you support us over at dogs247.com, we can do goofy stuff like this. Take an afternoon and watch an old game, and then come back and break it down with all three of us. So we'll end the episode right there. For Ben Wolk and Kipp Adams, I'm Jordan Hill. Thanks to everyone who checked this out. And remember, you can't spell dogs without WAG.